One subject we've been hearing a lot about at the Foil is how to introduce new sailing talent to SailGP and its high performance F50 catamarans. Upskilling new sailors is a really difficult thing with such limited practice time on the water. So maybe it's not that surprising we've been hearing a new term in the paddock: licensing. In other words, a license to race, a requirement much like Formula One drivers must earn through motor racing's super license system if they're to be allowed to join the Grand Prix grids. So, what are these licenses all about, and what do they mean for both current and aspiring SailGP competitors? To find out more about these licenses and the process of earning one, we spoke to Mike Buckley, CEO of the United States SailGP team.
I think, the league recognizes that it's really challenging to get new people experience as the league expands to more teams. The amount of people in the world that have experience sailing an F50, goes down, and that pool is smaller and smaller. And I think it's the league's way to keep tabs on making sure people are up to safety protocols and getting the proper simulator training and just kind of keeping track.
So, if SailGP competitors require a license to compete, what has that meant for existing crew members, some of whom have been part of the league for all of the previous 5 seasons? Well, it turns out a so called grandfathering process has been put in place to ensure even the most experienced sailors are accounted for under the licensing system, as Mike explains.
So basically, everybody that sailed in season 5 and season 4 has been grandfathered into their primary roles. Some of them have even been grandfathered into secondary roles, depending on how much simulator time and hours on the water and number of races. There's kind of a sliding scale, and each position has different requirements. Some more, some less. Obviously, the driver, has to be the most qualified.
And how about those much needed newbies we keep talking about? How do SailGP rookies earn the right to fly on an F50? It turns out there's a provisional license that's part of the system to introduce new blood.
Again, one of the hardest things is training, though, right? Is how do you get new people these provisional licenses? You're balancing short term and long term, and yeah, it's a tricky decision of when you're going to give your new people hours or minutes, in this case, to go get their provisional license.
SailGP's introduction of a licensing procedure has to be considered a sign of the league's increasing professionalism, part of a much needed drive to ensure the highest levels of safety for the world's fastest sailing series. But what about when a team is forced to pull in a super sub at the last minute? We're thinking about Glenn Ashby, the vastly experienced sailor who was flown into Australia's Flying Ruse lineup at the last minute in Perth following an injury incurred by Ian Goobs Jensen. Glenn didn't have one of these new licenses to compete at the 2026 season opener, so presumably there must be some leeway in the system.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn might have qualified for some sort of, legend status. He's one of the few people in the world he can step on any boat, anytime, any day, now or in 10 years, and be one of the best. Glenn's been in and out of SailGP for a long time as a coach, as a sailor. I believe he sailed at the beginning of season 4, so that would have ticked the box.
At Team USA, Mike tells us they've been quick to adapt to the licensing system for all their crew, not least for their reserve sailor Harry Melges, who was putting in some practice time ahead of the Perth race weekend. If circumstances demand Harry is required to step up hereafter, the team can be sure he'll be ready, with the paperwork to prove it.
What we did, during winter break is kind of go through and figure out which athletes over the last 2 years that since we've owned the team qualifies for what license. We've gone ahead, and everybody that qualifies for any provisional or grandfather license, we've gone ahead and grabbed those just as contingency plans. It's only a matter of time before 2 or 3 people get food poisoning, or God forbid somebody gets hurt, right? Which we've seen here this week. So we've tried to make sure we're covered in all positions, but the future is a guy like Harry, and so he just got 30 minutes before official practice racing kicks off in the strategy role. He'll get some reps on the wheel, he'll get some reps on the wing, on flight control. And the idea behind Harry is it's certainly not a talent thing, right? He oozes talent. It's an experience thing, and we want to bring him in due course.
Experience is everything in SailGP, which is precisely why it's so hard to introduce new young talent when time on the water is so limited for each team. On the face of it, more red tape for sailors who wish to compete sounds like a further hindrance. But in reality, the licensing system isn't a barrier for fresh talent. Rather, it's a means for the teams and the SailGP organization to ensure all competitors comply with the highest standards required to race at this level. And much like in motor racing, it will only raise safety standards across the fleet. The fact is, not just any Tom, Dick, or indeed Harry should be allowed to race an F50. It's only right that you need a license to race.